Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Total Biscuit, and perhaps you know, or perhaps you don't, that I run a Starcraft 2 eSports team in South Korea. We have professional gamers being paid a salary to play Starcraft 2. And I'm very passionate about that. Starcraft 2 eSports was really the first esport that I followed, and it's still really the only one that I follow with any great passion and interest. I watch a little bit of Dota 2 from time to time. I'll watch a little bit of Counter-Strike and Quake when it happens, but Starcraft 2 is certainly my love. There's no doubt about that. And I made a lot of Starcraft 2 content. I make less at the moment just because I'm very busy, but there's a big tournament coming up. On the 7th to the 8th of November, we have the World Championship Series at BlizzCon. The round of 8 onwards is going to be some of the best Starcraft 2 that's ever been watched in front of a gigantic audience in an arena. It will hopefully be the most successful Starcraft 2 event of all time. And I've had some people over the years ask me, can you explain the Starcraft 2 thing for me? Because I don't know what the hell you're talking about with half of this stuff. So this video is designed to be a beginner's guide to watching professional StarCraft 2 esports at the highest level. I'm going to try and explain this from the perspective of someone that has no idea what's going on, and hopefully by the end of it, you will understand just how StarCraft 2 works. So, welcome to StarCraft 2. It's a real-time strategy game, and it consists of 3 races battling each other for dominance. This guy right here is playing the Protoss race. He is in the red, and this fellow over here is playing the Terran race, and he is in the blue. The third race, which is of course the Zerg, is not featured in this video because the standard competitive format for StarCraft 2 is 1-on-1. So you can only see 2 races at any given time. Sometimes only 1, because hey, we might have a Protoss versus another Protoss. It's certainly possible. So what are you looking at here? This right here, and we're just going to pause this for a second. This is the main base, and this will be referred to in a cast as the main. Each player starts with 1, and they start with a small contingent of worker units. Each race has a different main building and a different set of workers. These are probes, and these over here are SCVs. There are minor differences in the way that they operate, but they both essentially do the same thing, in the sense that they are designed to mine resources, of which there are 2 kinds, minerals and gas. These are minerals. They generally look blue. There's like 1 map that has gold ones, but I don't think you're going to have to really worry about that at the moment. And they also mine gas, and this is the second resource right here. You need to construct a building, which is currently being built right here, the assimilator on top of one of these things, in order to mine gas. And it's important to mine enough of both of these in order to build a big army. Alright, let's unpause. Now, the principle of StarCraft 2 is that you need to destroy all of your opponent's buildings to win the game. However, this is rarely the case in competitive StarCraft, because once a professional player realizes that they are going to lose and there is no chance of a comeback, they will usually surrender by typing GG in the chat. Now, doing that will signal the end of the game and the victory to the last man standing, and then the series will usually progress onto the next map, and most of these series are decided in a best-of series. This is just a replay from the ladder, the Korean ladder specifically, and this is just a one-off game, but most competitive series are played in either best of 3, best of 5, or best of 7 formats, and this is designed to minimize variance and also make the series much more interesting and improve the strategic depth. So how do you beat your opponent? Well, you build units. You construct an army consisting of various units. You try to put together a composition which is effective against your opponents, and you attempt to take good fights. When you've crushed your opponent's army, you have a good chance of marching into their base and starting to destroy buildings. But of course, it's a little more complicated than that. How do you build units? Well, you do that by accruing resources. You can see them at the bottom of the screen right here on the user interface. Minerals and gas are being mined here by the red Protoss player, although the blue Terran is currently not mining any gas. And that's fine. Sometimes a Terran player or even another race might want to delay their gas for a while. Protoss players generally don't do that, but Terrans sometimes do, and they focus on building basic units, and you'll see that the Terran player is building their basic production building, the barracks. The barracks can be used to construct a marine, and it could also be used to construct a Reaper unit, whichever you prefer. The marine is the cheapest unit, it only costs minerals, you can make a lot of them, and they're generally the meat and potatoes of a Terran army. So this player right here is building 3 barracks to ensure that he can build 3 marines at a time. Now later on he'll be able to upgrade these barracks with various little tech add-ons which will allow him to construct more advanced units and also research upgrades like the stim pack or the combat shield, which can be applied to his marine units. But right now he is a little bit concerned that he might get attacked early in the game, so he's built a set of marines which he's going to use to defend this right here. Now, hang on a minute, you might say, as I pause the game once again. This looks very familiar to this. That's because it's exactly the same building. Now, you don't want just one base, because you want a lot of money. Remember how I explained that earlier? You need money in order to build an army. That means that your economy, as it's described, needs to be very good. What's a good economy? Well, it's an economy that is mining a lot of minerals. It's mining a lot of gas. It's giving you a lot of money to play with. In order to do that, you need to take more bases. This is what's called the so-called natural expansion. It's called the natural expansion because it's naturally where you would expand to first. Why? Because on most maps, the next base location is kind of down this little ramp, and it's very close to your main base, which means it's very easy to defend. If you expanded here, it would be a lot more difficult to defend it because your Marines are going to have to run over there to defend this. It's halfway across the map. It's a basic principle. You don't ever want to spread yourself too thinly. So if you expand too fast, you probably won't have enough resources to defend all of your expansions. They can be attacked and destroyed, and that's very costly. If you expand too slowly, then you're not going to have enough money to keep up with your opponent. And now we'll unpause once again. Both players have elected to expand quite early here, so both now have two of these main buildings. This is the Protoss Nexus, this is the Terran Command Center. This Terran Command Center has been upgraded to be an orbital command center, which gives a couple of nice little abilities, like the ability to drop down this, which is a temporary mining unit, which will mine more minerals over time than a basic worker will, although it does explode after a while, so it's a nice little way of mining quicker, and each race has different ways to accelerate their production. The Protoss has the so-called Chrono Boost, which will allow it to construct units faster. Now, what is going on here? Well, the Protoss player seems to be building a lot more production buildings. The gateway right here, he already had one, but right now he's building 3 more. Now, why would he do that? Well, that's because he wants to start pumping out military units. The last thing you want to do is allow the opposing player to just build unhindered and build a big army. You want to try and stop them from doing that, and this is often called harassment. What's going on here is that an SCV is being killed by a Protoss unit, a Stalker. The SCV was sent across the map to have a look around. This is called scouting. An SCV will often be used for this, or a basic military unit. He wants to try and find out information, because as you can see, we've got fog of war right here. The Terran player doesn't know what's going on here because he hasn't looked at it. So often, he's going to want to try and have a look around, and of course it's up to the opposing player to deny the scout, to kill it before it gains any valuable reconnaissance information. Now you can see that the Protoss player is posturing. He wants to attempt to attack the Terran player. Will he be able to do it? Well, that's questionable. He does have a small selection of units here. He has a Mothership Core, and he has a selection of Stalkers. These are basic ranged units for the Protoss, and he's also going to be upgrading the Stalkers, by the looks of it, with an ability called Blink. He has this tech building right here. He's researching Blink. Once he's done with Blink, he will try and attack. Blink will allow him to, every 10 seconds or so, send his units either backwards or forwards. It's a short teleport, essentially, and it can be used to control your units effectively. You'll notice here he blinks away because he realizes, I can't fight this, and I don't want to lose any units. So that's how he uses Blink. It's kind of similar to the Blink Dagger in Dota 2, and of course Flash in League of Legends, but each of these units can use Blink individually, so controlling those units and using Blink effectively can actually be a very difficult skill to learn. So the Protoss player continues to attack here. Now you might be wondering why. I mean, he surely can't go up the ramp and break this defensive position. You're right, but what he can do is he can use this to protect what's going on back home. He's building another command center, as you can see right here. Another command center. Another nexus, sorry. I keep getting those mixed up. Another main building. He is taking a 3rd base. And all of what's going on here is designed to stop the Terran player from moving across the map and attacking him. He knows he can't break this position, but he's trying to contain his opponent. Now, there are a couple of principles and terms that you really need to know when you're watching competitive StarCraft. And the 2 M's are perhaps the most important. Micro and macro. You're going to hear this a lot. What's the difference? Well, micro is how you control your units. You noticed a little bit of it earlier. It can be as basic as moving a unit forward or backwards, or it can be something advanced, like individually blinking a Stalker backwards in order to avoid fire and force the enemy's units to auto-target something different. Micromanagement, or micro, is very, very important. It's required. The last thing you want to do is run your army face first into another army and hope for the best. Micromanagement allows you to take the best fights, it allows you to take the best engagements, and use your units optimally. And then, of course, you need to be thinking about macro. This is the other side of the coin. Macro is how effectively you mine resources and then spend them. And that means you get research faster. That means you build a bigger army. Now, speaking of army, the Terran player has bypassed this little container and is actually attacking the Protoss. However, he realizes that this is suicidal. He picks up his units in his medevac dropships and he moves away instantly. And even that's just a little example of micro. But here's the thing. He's controlling more than one thing at a time. Back at home, he's able to break out and destroy this pylon right here, which is used to warp in Protoss units that can be used to attack the Terran player. So he is cleaned up at home, and he has moved away. However, he's in a little bit of trouble, because there's a lot of units in these things, and if they get shot down, they all die. And the Protoss player is actively trying to hunt them, so the Terran player is going to have to watch out a little bit here. And the Protoss knows where they are, because he has this little invisible scout unit called the Observer that he's built. Now, who is winning right now? This is often a question that I'm asked when I have, say, people that don't really watch StarCraft come and watch StarCraft with me, either at an event or just at home. Who's winning? Who's winning? Well, that could be a difficult thing to say. So let's pause for a second and let's have a look at the situation. How do you determine who is winning in a StarCraft game? Well, the most obvious way, but this is also, by the way, not necessarily accurate, is to look at the supply count. Now, down here, you will notice that the blue Terran has 135 supply worth of units. The red Protoss has 129 supply worth of units. So, this dude has more stuff. But does that mean he's winning? Not necessarily, because he might not have the right stuff. He might not have the right units to fight what his opponent actually has. You'll see this large walker unit right here for the Protoss player. This is called a Colossus. It's a very dangerous unit, and there are only certain ways that you can fight it effectively, and if you fight it with the wrong set of units, then you're gonna lose. It's about trading efficiently in an army fight. If you have units that are good against other units, you'll probably trade well. You're always gonna have some people die, but you want your army to be the last one standing, and the way that you do that is to make sure you have the right units for the job. Does the Terran player have the right units for the job? Well, we can have a look down here. You'll see units down the bottom. Does he have things that can effectively engage this Colossus? The answer is, well, not really. He's got Marauder units, which are very good at killing them, but he doesn't have Vikings, and Vikings are flying units that can shoot at Colossus, because they're so big, they basically count as air units. However, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. Yes, this guy has a Colossus, but how many does he have? Because if he only has one Colossus, then maybe it's not going to be so effective. Maybe the Terran player can attack right now. Maybe he can't. And you've got to really have a look at not only how many units the opponent has, but exactly what those units are. Maybe a lot of this supply is in worker units. In the case of the Terran player, it really isn't. He's only got 2 bases. The Protoss player has 3. The Protoss player, I believe, has more worker units than the Terran. In fact, actually, he has identical numbers here, as you can see down the bottom. 56 to 56. So the Terran has a slightly larger army, but does he have the right kind of units? It's difficult to know at this point who's winning, and a commentator will often point out things like, well, the Protoss player has a 3rd base. This is an advantage that the Protoss player has, because bases, well, they run out of resources sometimes. You'll see right here, these minerals, well, they're starting to run a little bit low, and they'll be visually represented, and once they're completely mined out, they'll disappear. So you can't stay on the same base forever. You've got to keep expanding. That's the way the game's designed. So if the Terran player is only sitting on 2 bases, then he might run into problems later on in the game because he's going to run out of resources, and maybe when he decides to expand, it's dangerous to do so. Now, the Protoss player has split himself a little bit thin here. He's using a fairly small army to defend 3 bases at once, but he gains an economic advantage by doing so, so he is actually bringing in more money for the most part. A little bit deceptive sometimes when dealing with Protoss versus Terran, but he is mining a lot. And indeed, if he took his 5th and 6th gas geyser here, he could build a lot of high-tech units and really heavy research. Now, he's not elected to do that up to this point. He is researching things. He is currently building an armor upgrade as well as a range upgrade for his Colossus. But he's not really going too heavy into the tech. So let's restart and see what's going on. So, small Terran army is moving across the map. They're going to attack and kill this Zealot very, very easily, no problem at all. And this is actually given an opportunity, since the army has moved away and is posturing to defend, for these medevac units to get out of there and to regroup. Now, the medevacs are going to heal these units on the ground using their energy, and hopefully they will regroup with the Terran force. But there's a bit of a problem here. We talked about the size of the Terran's army, but it's split up in 2 places, whereas the Protoss army is kind of all grouped together. Now, a 3rd base is being taken here by the Terran. And really, what the Protoss player would love to do is to try and deny mining. Now, I mentioned the term harass earlier. Now, economic harassment is key to playing StarCraft 2. Because remember what I said earlier about macro. It's important to build the largest army, the most effective and most powerful army in the shortest amount of time possible. And the way you do that is by having lots of production and lots of money to fuel that production. The way that you can stop that from happening is by killing worker units and destroying these bases. Now, what this Protoss player here is doing is he is using a Zealot to go and attack the worker line, and he's going to try and kill some workers, and he's going to get one. He might be able to get another. And there are various ways to harass this worker line. The Terran player needs to respond to this because he's losing workers, and he actually ends up losing 3, possibly even... Nope, he's going to lose 3 by the looks of it. So this Zealot has done a good job as he loses 4. There you go. Nice little bit of harassment right there, and what that means is that there's now less, well, there were less workers for the Terran, but the Terran is, of course, building more workers to compensate for that. The more workers die, the less mining happens. It's really that simple. So stopping an opponent from actually mining is very, very important. It's one of the key strategies involved in StarCraft 2. Now, what's happening over here is there's a bunch of units in dropships that are actually going to go and attempt to drop into the enemy base and do damage. This is an effective strategy because if you know where your opponent's army is, if it's well away from the base, then you can exploit that fact, and that's kind of what the Terran player is attempting to do. He's moving out here. He's saying, look, I'm going to go attack you from the front, and he's trying to draw his opponent out of position so that he can drop into the base and start to kill important buildings. And things like killing the Templar archives would be very, very useful here. Terran uses a scan in order to find out what's in the base, and it looks like he has met with Protoss resistance and is being driven back. And here comes the drop right into the main base. He kills some warped-in units, and he immediately engages against these photon cannon defensive emplacements. He destroys many of them, and he's going to try and now focus down some key tech structures like the Templar archives. If he kills this, the Protoss player can't build any more High Templar, and they have very powerful, effectively wizard units that cause some nasty things to happen, including the Psionic Storm, which is a massive area of effect ability which does a lot of damage. He's destroyed a couple of key buildings, he sacrificed some units to do it, and now he's going to get out. Was it worth it? Well, that's the kind of thing a commentator would tell you. He'd say, well, this attack was costly for him, but if he killed some key units, then it was maybe worthwhile. And things like destroying tech structures are perhaps equally important to killing worker units, because you stop your opponent building these very powerful units that could otherwise destroy your army. A 4th base is now being taken by the Protoss, and this could be potentially vulnerable, because of course the Terran player is out on the map with his army here, and he is going to attempt to attack. Now, looking at these units, you might think, well, how is this actually balanced? These units are clearly different to each other. Yes, the game is balanced asymmetrically. So units are not identical in the 3 different races, but regardless, they've managed to balance it in such a way that you can build a certain number of units to counter this other unit. There are soft counters and hard counters within the game, which allow you to play a little bit of kind of rock, paper, scissors. And you can also upgrade your units with different abilities and different statistical upgrades. Let's take another pause. Down the bottom here, you will notice these 2 icons. These are armor and weapons upgrades. The Terran player is attempting to upgrade to level 3 armor and level 3 weapons. What this is going to do is it's going to add value to the unit's armor, which reduces the amount of damage they take on every hit, and increase the amount of damage output that a unit does. This is again a very important thing to do, because during the game your opponent will probably try and upgrade their units. If you don't keep up with your opponent's upgrades, you'll suddenly find that your equally sized army just doesn't fight as well. You can also research unit-specific upgrades, as we saw earlier with the extended thermal lance for the Colossus. Now, what that upgrade does is it extends the range of the Colossus weapon from 6 units to 9 units. That's fairly significant. That's a 50% increase. So that's the sort of thing that you might want to get. And many units are perhaps not as effective if they don't have these specific upgrades. The Marines, well, they have the combat shield upgrade. You can even see it visually represented right here. And they also have the Stim Pack, which trades health for fire speed and movement speed. And that can be activated every now and again in order to give these guys a sudden burst of power. These are the sort of things that you have to consider. It's not just about building units, it's about just how effective your individual units are. And the Terran player is actually ahead in terms of his upgrades. Right now, the Protoss player is researching level 2 armor and weapons, but the Terran player already has level 2 armor and weapons, and that means that his units are going to be on average more effective than the Protoss units, and that's very important. As you can see, the Protoss player is having a lot of trouble defending his base. He's warping in units to try and make it happen, but it's currently not working, and the Nexus, the main building of the Protoss here, is under fire. We've got an Immortal that came out here that just got destroyed instantly, and a Colossus comes to clear things up, and it maybe is about time for the Terran player to actually leave, but he's committing to killing this Nexus. He's trying to focus it down, and he gets it with the last shot. He leaves a few stragglers to die. Unfortunately, Private Ryan will not be saved today, but he kills this main building. Now, Was that a good thing? Well, usually killing a main building like that is crucial, but this was the main nexus, and as you can see, there's not many resources left here. So really, that nexus doesn't need to be there. If he'd been able to kill this nexus, or even better, this nexus, I think that would have been a very powerful blow struck against the Protoss player. But look at where the army is. This attack drew the Protoss army out of position. And now the Terran army is moving across the map potentially to attack this base, and he may be able to destroy it. So remember that every attack is an investment, and it's not necessarily obvious exactly what effect it will have. It's part of an overall strategy. This is a strategy game after all. It's not just about throwing units at something and hoping it wins. The overall strategy here was to draw the opponent out of position so that he can strike at a different location. And all the while, he's also able to stop his bases from being attacked because the Protoss player's on the defensive. He can't afford to commit units to attacking the Terran. It's on pause. Now, there's a term that you might hear, and this is linked into upgrades and also into what kind of units you have, and it's called a timing attack. Now, timings are windows within the game that allow a player to exploit a particular advantage that they might have. Here's some basic examples of timings. The Terran player gets 3-3 upgrades, whereas the Protoss player only has 2-2 upgrades. There is then a timing window where the Terran player can attack before the opponent has equal upgrades, where his army will have a numerical advantage. It's very important to try and exploit these timing windows. If you know your opponent is behind on upgrades, you will be able to attack and hopefully take a favorable trade. And now we actually have a battle going on here. So let's see what's going on. The position of the Terran army is perhaps not that good, and the Terran army is eating Psi Storms and various different attacks. However, he's pushing forward. He runs through yet another Psionic Storm and is taking significant damage, and the Protoss player was able to back off using defensive spells to damage the Terran army. So, as it stands, the Terran army has not won the fight yet. However, if we pause here, when we talk a little bit about unit compositions, the Protoss player has a few problems. If you look at this army, it looks very scary. It's got 3 Colossus, it has an Archon in it, it's got an Immortal, and it's got a bunch of High Templar. However, some of these High Templar have used all their energy, so they're not going to be able to utilize any more Psionic Storms. And more to the point, the kind of meat at the front, which usually consists of these units, the Zealot, well, it's kind of gone. So if the Terran player turned around and fought now, he'd probably do quite a lot of damage. But I would imagine that based on what the Terran player has here, he probably doesn't want to fight. If you look at his composition, he's got a lot of Vikings, which are going to kill a Colossus very quickly, but he doesn't have a lot on the ground. And I think that it would be a mistake to fight here. But let's see if he decides to do it. The Protoss player continues to push forward. The Terran player is trying to move away, and usually the Terran player can get away by using the Stim ability. He looks like he actually wants to set up for a fight as the Protoss player comes in, because, as I said, the Zealots, where are they? They're not there, so the vulnerable Stalkers are at the front here, and EMP lands, destroying the shields of the Stalkers, and suddenly the counterattack comes in. The Colossus fall quickly, but this is going to be a costly fight for both sides. Who will win it? Well, it looks like that Psi Storm is very much going to decide it, but reinforcements coming from the Terran player here. The Vikings land on the ground, and the fight is very, very close on both sides. But here come reinforcements from the side. They flank the Colossus. They destroy it very easily, and the Protoss army will be crushed here. Not without significant losses to the Terran, but it will be attacked and killed nonetheless. A Warpin of Zealots comes in from here, Colossus comes in from the side, but that's vulnerable, it's not protected. Perhaps that will go down, but in comes the Mothership Core, using its Time Warp ability to slow down its opponent. This is an example of micromanagement right here. The Protoss player moves his Colossus back, uses a Time Warp to slow down the opponent's units. In response, the opponent picks up his units in a medevac and boosts them in the direction of the Colossus and drops his units down there, but the Colossus survives. There's so much going on in each and every fight. There's a lot of intricacy involved in the control here that you can appreciate by watching a lot of StarCraft 2. Now, who's winning? Let's pause again. Who's winning? Well, if we have a look at the unit count right here and the supply count, you will notice that everyone's kind of fairly even. The army supply is reasonably even. If we look at the upgrade count, currently that's in favor of the Terran player. Right now, level 3 weapons, level 3 armor are being researched by the Protoss, but the Terran player already has them. So the Terran player might want to keep trying to take fights, but he lost a lot of units. And his army consists now of 14 Marines, 12 Marauders, 8 Medevacs, and a Viking. That's not a lot. The Protoss player, on the other hand, has 18 Zealots, 2 High Templar, 3 Colossus, and a Mothership Core. I wouldn't fight here. Now you might ask, well, why? Well, this is about unit composition. Marauders, which make up the bulk of the Terran army, are not very good against Zealots, especially Zealots upgraded with the charge ability. Marauders will lose against this army. It's as simple as that. Marauders are designed as anti-armor units. They're tank busters, essentially. They will kill the Colossus very fast. They will kill the Stalker very fast because they have a bonus against armored units, but they don't have a bonus against light units, which the Zealots are. So if the Terran player fought here, he would lose that fight fairly decisively. And Marauders, they're not that expensive, but they're more expensive than Marines, and you don't want to throw them away. That's not a very good idea at all. The Terran player is attempting to take a 4th base. The Protoss player wants to deny that from happening, as you can see. So he is posturing and is going to try and take a fight. Now, if he took a fight right now, the Terran player would lose. So the question is, does the Protoss player realize that? Well, right now, the Protoss player is actually kind of being pulled around by these harassment attempts, this dropping, but this is all going to die. So that's a kind of stinging loss here for the Terran, and I'd even say that that was something of a mistake for the Terran player, but it's bought the Terran player a little bit of time. Will the Protoss player attempt to attack this base? He should. I think he should commit to it. This is a position where the Protoss player should win this fight, and being able to stop this base from going down is really important. The Terran player is upgrading this base with a planetary fortress cannon, which will allow it to kind of defend itself, but still, on its own, it would lose. However, the Protoss player decides, you know what, I know where my opponent's army is, maybe I can attack somewhere differently, maybe I could attack this base. The Terran player now has 5 bases, and is pulled around everywhere to try and defend that. And that's the disadvantage to having so many bases. Protoss player is looking for a fight. He throws down another Psystorm and then merges his High Templar into a powerful short-range unit called an Archon. The Terran player knows what's going on here. He's setting up a defense. He wants to get an optimal arc of engagement. However, the Protoss player has an advantage in terms of his army supply, and he's about to have 3/3 upgrades. He's about to have the same upgrades as the Terran. That could be a real problem. So if the Terran wants to take a fight, he's going to have to do so on favorable terms. The question is, can he get favorable terms? He's looking for them, but the Protoss player is trying to make space and deny his opponent from attacking him. Now, you'll find that StarCraft 2 involves a decent amount of posturing around the map. It will not be constant action. If a player doesn't want to fight, then he's going to do everything he can to avoid that and to buy time. If a player does want to fight, then of course he will move out across the map and attack. Now, in order to prevent players from just sitting on bases and building units forever, StarCraft 2 has what's called a supply limit, and for each race, that supply limit is 200. The Protoss player and the Terran player are almost at 200 supply. When they reach 200, they will not be able to build any more units. This could be kind of important, because if you're stuck with a 200 supply army that's not the right kind of composition, you might want to actually lose some of those units, bleed them off, trade them, so that you can build better units. And there's really not necessarily a unit that's godlike and better than everything. Each unit has its own particular role. Yes, a Colossus is very powerful, but it's also very expensive, and it takes a long time to build. The Terran player here has a lot of cheap units in the form of Marines, but with lots of them, you get a lot of firepower, and they're rebuilt very quickly. And you can see they're fighting over this watchtower right here to gain a bit of visibility. Psystorms go off, EMPs go off, but otherwise a fairly insignificant engagement, and both of our players will be reinforcing their armies, and maybe they'll change their compositions. Maybe they'll try something different. Another fight comes on here. Again, not a good position for the Protoss player. Better arc here for the Terran. They were able to do more damage, but it looks like we will get this happening eventually. A lot of posturing going on here. Will the Terran player be able to get the advantage he needs in order to break this? It's a good question. Let's pause for a second. And I'll take a drink if you don't mind. Commentating can be hard work. Who's winning? Again, good question. How many bases does each player have? Well, you can count them on the map. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Always watch the minimap, by the way. This area right here is absolutely crucial to understanding StarCraft 2. Understand that if there's a blob moving across the opponent's side of the map, then the opponent is probably going to have to defend against it. Simple as that. You know, seeing the flow of colors on this map is a very easy way of understanding it. Think about it like American football, yeah? You try and get the ball to your opponent's half of the field, and you try and score a touchdown. Well, in StarCraft 2, the touchdown is getting into your opponent's base and wrecking stuff, yeah? You want to be in your opponent's base doing damage. That's your opponent's end zone. So have a look at that map, and you'll find that if you watch the flow of color, then you'll actually understand the game a lot better. But who's winning? How many bases? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bases for the Protoss player. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bases for the Terran player. Looks equal, right? That's deceptive. Because what used to be there, you remember? There were some nice little pots of blue, delicious minerals. They're gone. They've all been mined out. And if we head to the main base, same story. There's still some gas remaining, but all the minerals are gone. So we need to look for mining bases. Well, this base is still mining, but we're running out of resources. Look at these little piles. They're almost gone. This base, well, that's got loads of minerals. This base also has loads of minerals. Let's look at the Protoss player. Same deal. No minerals. No minerals. Running out of minerals. Loads and loads of minerals. So, economically, both of these players, they're doing fairly well. You might say, well, I looked at the unit count, and, well, the Terran player has 10 less workers than the Protoss, so he's losing, right? No, not necessarily. The worker count doesn't necessarily mean that. The Terran player, as I mentioned earlier, has the ability to drop so-called mule units, which means that they can supplement their income. It's just one of the unique advantages the Terran player has. So, at the moment, they're both doing fairly well. They're both banking up a lot of resources, which they can then spend when they lose units in their army to replenish them. They're both doing kind of fine economically. They're also quite equal on technology. And indeed, we even see shields being upgraded here for the Protoss player. So, it comes down to how good they are at fighting. And one of these players is probably going to want to try and destroy one of these bases if they can. Because what a great way it would be to cut off your opponent's ability to reinforce if you could blow up one of the bases that's making them money. Alright, we've got another fight going on here. A Psystorm goes down, but not as effective this time. There's a Time Warp and a Psystorm as well. The Terran player is just stubbornly running through that stuff right now, which you might find that a commentator would say that that's a micro mistake, that a Terran player shouldn't be running into Psystorms the way that they are, but this Terran player is consistently doing that and is taking a lot of damage as a result. So, Protoss is doing well, but the Terran player fires back with electromagnetic pulse, neutralizing the shields on the Protoss army, and as a result is able to push forward a little bit. But it looks like the Protoss is starting to overrun the Terran, and indeed he's starting to kill valuable units. He's going for medevacs, he's going for ghosts. These are very expensive units, they're hard to lose. The Protoss player continues to push forward. The Zealots are now moving towards the front to try and take some of the heat off of the more vulnerable units, but as it stands, the Protoss player doesn't seem like he really wants to fight here. In fact, he's trying to kill a bunch of Vikings, but he's losing a lot of Stalkers in doing so. In come the Zealots, and now the Protoss thinks, right, I've got the angle on this. I can really take this fight. And look at the health bars on the Terran player. You'll notice that the units are becoming very injured, and as a result, of course, they will die. An injured unit fights just as well as an uninjured unit, but of course, last thing you want to do is have your unit's HP go down to 0, and the Terran player is being driven back effectively right here. But he pushes. He has no intention of allowing his opponent to break one of his bases. He's desperately trying to defend here. He sends his ghosts forward, again, with electromagnetic pulse to attempt to neutralize the shields and energy, and he gets effective shots off. Archons are being morphed in here. More Psystorms falling. Lasers, storms, lightning, all sorts of things going on here. And at the moment, the Terran player is in a bit of trouble. He has a slightly smaller army, but it's not small enough to the point where the Terran player can't effectively fight. But here's the concern. The Terran player is on the defensive. What did I mention earlier? Economic harassment. What has the Terran player not been able to do? Economically harass. All these bases are completely unmolested, and the Terran player would absolutely love to fight them. He'd love to destroy some of these bases, but how can he if he has to defend against the aggression of his opponent? So right now, the opponent plants himself in the middle of the map and says, look, I have this big, scary army, and you know it. You're using your scans to see, look at the size of my army. I'm not scared of you. And the Terran player is saying, oh, well, I don't want to fight that, but I really need to do damage because I can't let the Protoss player keep doing this. And now he's going to move out with a drop. Now, these medevacs are a bit injured. This is actually kind of risky. You want to really try and repair your vehicles if they take too much damage, because if these get shot down from the sky, all the units in them will die, which is not good. But he's going to attempt to do it anyway. He's trying to maneuver around here, but this is a very dangerous thing to do. A drop can be very effective. Pick up units, drop them into the enemy base, blow up some workers, blow up some buildings. It's an effective strategy, but it's also a bit of risk-reward. If you lose those units, then you're in trouble, and indeed, the Protoss player knows they're there. He's seen them, so he doesn't want to go anywhere near those right now. He's trying to draw his opponent out of position again. This is a strategy he used earlier, but will it be effective? As the Protoss player isn't taking the bait, and he blinks under the medevacs, and he kills 1, 2, and 3. That's a lot of resources the Terran player just lost. You see his supply plummet. All of the units in those medevacs, they die instantly when they're shot down, and the medevacs, of course, are not cheap either. So that's not the kind of thing that you want to be losing. That's a major loss here for the Terran, and as a result, he spends some of the minerals he's banked and the gas that he's banked to replenish his units. In fact, he's even building nuclear missiles and all sorts of advanced technology right now. But should he take a fight at the moment? Well, hard to say. Let's pause a second. This game is currently 31 minutes in, and this is 31 minutes in game time. This is slightly faster than real time. Now, you might be saying, well, do all these games really go on for this long? No, actually, they don't. This is considered to be a late game scenario here versus for the Terran and Protoss players. They're in a situation where they're building the most powerful upgraded units that they can, and they have a lot of bases. And in a scenario like this, action can go down all over the map. But, in the same token, games can end after 7 or 8 minutes. There are some effective rush strategies that if an opponent is caught off guard, they can lose to them. A game could end in 8 minutes on one base. It's possible. You might hear the term greedy thrown around in a cast. If a player is too greedy, he might attempt to cut corners and build less units in favor of trying to either tech up quickly and gain advanced technology faster than the opponent, or build more bases and mine more, and that can leave him vulnerable to attack if the other player decides to get aggressive. This is all part of the strategy in Starcraft 2, and it's tied into the idea of scouting. You need to know what your opponent is doing. If you don't, well, you're flying blind. And some pause. As it stands, the Terran player is doing okay, but he's maybe not in an ideal position. The question is, where is this game going to go? Because we're looking at a replay right here. This game's going to be over in the next couple of minutes. Now, how could that happen? Well, usually it happens by one player engaging against another in a very effective way and crushing their opponent's army. The question is, who will make that happen? The Terran player is playing very defensively. He's hanging near his planetary fortress. He's going to try and build a second one. And indeed, he's actually found a Protoss base that has expanded all the way over there. He's going to try and do damage, but the Protoss army is coming in from the side. He may be able to effectively flank him. However, the Terran player is trying to draw the Protoss player out of position. EMPs go down. They land effectively on these High Templar and the Archons. The Protoss player's army potentially has some weaknesses. It only has 6 Zealots to absorb fire and only 3 Archons. This is actually a very tech-heavy army that could potentially be destroyed because it actually doesn't really have the meat. It doesn't have anything to kind of tank the damage at the front. So there's a potential problem with this army composition, and we will see in the next couple of minutes if that ends up being the undoing of the Protoss. Has he built the wrong composition of units? It's hard to say. These are all very powerful in their own right, but against mass-ranked firepower from the Terran, will they be able to hold up? Well, there's a lot of Colossi. Let's pause for a second and look at compositions. There's a lot of Colossi, but there are also 10 Vikings. So the Protoss player is going to try and kill these Vikings so that they can't fire at the Colossi. A storm goes down, another storm goes down, several Vikings are killed, and the Colossus now are left without too much protection, but simultaneously without too much that can attack them. But look, the front has collapsed, as you can see, and the Terran player stims forward, but he runs right into a huge Psy Storm, which obliterates most of his army. Backwards and forwards, and at the moment it looks like the Protoss player has a good edge in this particular conflict. He's still got an army left. The Terran player took a lot of damage, and the Terran player is going to be struggling to replenish his losses from this position. And finally, we might see the Protoss player actually break a base and destroy it, and that will give him an economic advantage over his opponent. Another storm goes down. This Protoss player is very difficult to deal with at the moment because he has power units, and the army of the Terran player is being crushed, and good game. As you can see, that's the surrender in action right there. And you might think, well, why did he surrender? He has 109 supply. Yeah, but a lot of that's in workers. If you look at his actual army, it's 11 Marines, a Ghost, and a Marauder, a Medevac, and 2 Vikings. It's not enough to fight that army. He does not have enough to kill his opponent. It's really that simple. He does not have enough. And he knows it because he's a pro gamer. These guys right here with the barcodes, and you might be wondering, well, why do they have barcodes as their names? Well, on the Korean ladder, you generally want to conceal your identity so people don't learn your strategies. And this is a game from the Korean ladder. Of course, when you're watching BlizzCon, all the players will have names. This will be a lot easier to track. But these guys are pro gamers. They're the best of the best of the best. They understand when they've been beaten. And sometimes they make mistakes. Sometimes they surrender too easily. But in this case, the surrender is entirely justified. The Terran player does not have enough to stop the Protoss player's advance anymore. He knows that, and he's not going to waste any more time on this game. He says GG. He calls surrender, and that, as they say, is that. So hopefully this was a little bit helpful in understanding how StarCraft 2 actually works. I gave you a little bit of terminology. You'll hear some shorthand and things like racks and gates and things like that. You're going to hear that stuff. And it's fairly easy to look that stuff up. Racks is shorthand for barracks. 2 racks is shorthand for 2 barracks. 3 racks for 3 barracks, and so on and so forth. It's reasonably easy to understand. Once you know the basics, it's really not too difficult to get a handle on some of the shorthand and nomenclature that's used within StarCraft 2. And this is, of course, a much longer game than some of the StarCraft 2 matches we will see at BlizzCon. Maybe some of them will go longer than that. There's a lot of variety in the StarCraft 2 matchups, the way that players execute strategies and builds, and, of course, take their fights. Ladies and gentlemen, my beginner's guide to StarCraft 2 and watching competitive esports. I hope that helped. I don't know if it did, but hopefully that was a decent enough explanation. Please remember to watch BlizzCon. I've put a link in the description below this video so you can watch the live stream. It's all free to watch. Please do enjoy it, hopefully as I do, and check out my Starcraft channel over at youtube.com/TotalBiscuit. I'll see you next time.